And the flop comes the king high flop. On this note, if you're playing against a regular player, you would want to bet your entire range. However, in this case, we know that our opponent will step when we check to. And he makes the random step to 35,000. How to beat maniacs. In the last video, I showed you a table full of crazy actions. Everyone was playing extremely loose and a lot of betting here and there, chips flying around, a complete chaos. Your studied GTO solutions do not work on those tables. You need big adjustments and deviations from your strategy. I'm going to show you a couple of hand reviews on a table full of loose and aggressive players. This game was hosted in CTP Taipei. It's an invitational game that has been live streamed. Everyone was given 1,000,000 chips and the blinds start at 2,000, 4,000. Here in the first hand, I pick up pocket 9s from early position. The blinds were 2,000, 4,000 and I raise it up to 11. And cutoff flats with ace 9 offsuit. I do not like this call. And as all loose aggressive maniacs do, they hit their 1 overcard right on the flop. So this is one of the spots you'll be facing pretty often, which is playing out of position with a pair when an overcard is on the flop. Here I pulled up the chart where hijack raised and cutoff flatted. This is gonna be a single raise pot. This shows you how an out of position player should be playing on the flop. You check 90% of your entire range, which is pretty much close to 100%. So in a nutshell, you will be checking your entire range if you're playing out of position in a single raise pot, especially on an ace high flop. This is the aggregated report for 200 big blinds cash game hijack versus cutoff single raise pot. The global check frequency for the hijack is 84.8%, and I guess we can round this up to 100. So whenever you're playing from the hijack and the person next to you, the cutoff or the button flat calls, you will be checking most of your time. So if you have pocket 9s on this board, you can comfortably be checking. And if you have an ace, the solver will also prefer checking. Why is that? Why can't I just bet with my ace and check with all my pairs? When you compare the two ranges from the hijack, which is the pre-flop raiser, and the cutoff, which is the pre-flop caller, the cutoff is actually at an equity advantage. You can see that the cutoff has 55% equity. So if hijack is raising a range that looks like this, the cutoff will be flat calling with a lot stronger hand, which results in the cutoff having a stronger range in general. Here you can see that the cutoff, which is the green line, has generally stronger hands throughout their entire range. That's why the solver likes to protect his range by checking their entire range. And in this case as well, your hand will be played much more profitably when you start the flop with a check. Don't worry too much about the overcards, because your opponent will tell you how strong their hands are throughout their bet sizes. Let's see how the hand progresses. I start with a check. And the cutoff snaps for 11,000. Like I said, whenever the in-position caller hits the board, hits top pair, they will step for a medium-ish or small size. So what would you do if you were in my shoes? You have pocket 9s and the in-position caller stabs to you. Depending on the size, you can decide to peel. In this case, the in-position caller has only bet 11,000, so I decided to peel. The turn comes to the queen of spades. I check again, and the cutoff quickly checks back. The river is the jack of hearts, and we easily go to showdown. So in this hand, our opponent had an ace with a mediocre kicker. So he decided to go for 1 street on the flop and a check through the river. We lost the minimum and played our hand perfectly. Let's move on to the next hand. Here in the next hand, we pick up ace 8 of diamonds from under the gun +1. We open raise to 11 and the small blind flat calls with jack 7 offsuit, which of course is a terrible call. Let's take a look at the flop. The flop is the queen of spades, 10 of clubs, and the 4 of spades. So we completely whiff the flop. If the small blind flat calls in this situation, would you like to continuation bet? If you take a look at the previous video, the player on the small blind is a very sticky calling station and likes to stab and probe bet on every street when it goes check check on the flop or on the turn. He will always stab or probe on the turn or river. So that's why I also considered making a small c-bet, because if I don't c-bet, he will for sure make a big probe bet on the turn. But this specific hand does not have a lot of chance to improve, and it also has a little bit of showdown value. That's why I decided to check back. And the turn comes the deuce of spades. I don't have any draws on this flop, so when he pro-bets, I was planning to fold this hand. And like I just said, whenever I check on the flop, he will always bet the turn. And I've seen him doing this to me many times. But whenever you play against a maniac like this, don't ever take any of his bet personal, because players like that don't know what they are doing. Just play your strategy, play solid and tight. So here comes the next hand, where the same opponent raises from the hijack with 8-4 offsuit. He raises it up to 11,000, and I on the small blind wake up with pocket jacks. I decide to 3-bet to 41, and surprisingly 8-4 offsuit makes the call. And the flop comes the king high flop. On this note, if you're playing against a regular player, you would want to bet your entire range. This is the GTO Wizard solution when the hijack raises and the small blind 3-bets. On a king 9-6 rainbow flop, you check 0% of your range and mostly make a small sized c-bet for about 20% or 33% pot. Even your pocket pairs between the king and the 9 make a small c-bet. However, in this case, we know that our opponent will step when we check too. So if we check, he will bet with any hand, even hands like 8-4 offsuit. So we decide to check. And he makes the random step to 35,000. This is exactly what I expected. However, I didn't know he was flat calling 3-bets with 8-4 offsuit. I put him on a lot of ace-x hands like ace-5 or ace-7, ace-9, etc. Or medium-ish pairs that we have dominated. Unfortunately, if he has a medium pair, he might be checking down the turn in the river. If he has a bluff, he might be keep barreling. And I make the easy call. The turn is the ace of hearts, a card that I do not want to see at all, because a lot of his range consists of offsuit ace-x, especially when he calls 3-bets in position. I check again, and he decides to check back. The river is the 7 of spades, and now since there are 2 overcards on the board, I decide to go for showdown. Betting here doesn't make much sense, and I don't think our opponent will step again with a bluff when there's an ace and a king on the board, which heavily favors my range, is what you think. So the really annoying thing when you play against players like this is they will just make random spewy bets like this. He bets 130, which is almost the size of the pot. I reviewed this hand to a friend of mine, and he advised me to make a small block bet on the river. What do you think? What would you do in this situation? Would you check call, check fold, or make a small block bet? The next time I will be facing a situation like this, I might block for 10%. And now that I'm looking at his cards, I can imagine how needy I was playing on this table. They think that if they just bet big on the river, they'll just make me fold any hand. But there's not much I can do with my pocket jacks when there are 2 overcards on the board. So this is a pure bluff catcher. And I unfortunately fold. What would you do? Are you going to make the hero call? I unfortunately decided not to. And here in the next hand, the same opponent raises under the gun with 6-4 suited. He raises to 9, and the player from under the gun +2 flat calls with king-queen offsuit. And here in the hijack, we wake up with king-queen suited. Since there's a caller in between, I think this is a very good hand to 3-bet squeeze. I decide to make the 3-bet to 40,000. And of course, under the gun calls with 6-4 suited. And so does the caller in between. And we go to a 3-way flop. And on the flop again, we completely miss. We only have a gut shot and we do not have any flush draws. Checks around to me, and since I'm in position and I'm the 3-better, I could start making a bet representing a strong ace and make them fold a lot of mediocre pairs like pocket 5s, pocket 6s, pocket 7s, and pocket 8s, because those pairs are not going to call on these kind of flops. And when I make multiple barrels on the turn and river, hands like queen jack or jack 10 is also likely to fold. However, on a table like this, where people are just extreme calling stations, I just decide not to make the bluff. So I make the nitty-gritty check on the flop. Turn comes the 7 of diamonds. Under the gun checks again. And here, surprisingly, the caller starts to make the bluff with king-queen high. He has been losing many big pots in previous hands, so I think he's slightly on tilt. And to get his chips back, he started pulling off weird bluffs. But there's literally nothing that we can do in this situation. He steps for 83,000 and we make the fold. 6-4 suited, peels off. And the river is the 5 of spades. Do you think King Queen offsuit will keep pulling off the bluff? Which is pretty bold of him. But I think he knows that under the gun will just calling with trashy hands like 6-4 or 7-3, 7-6 and hands like that. So he makes a big bag on the river and makes the 4 fold. Even though he made the 4 fold, and some people might think this is a good bluff, I do not think like that at all. He played a hand in a 3-way pot that he's not supposed to and just pulled off random bluffs in a multi-way pot. And here we play the next hand. Our French fellow from under the gun picks up pocket queens and raises to 12. Me under the gun plus 2 flat calls with Jack 10 of diamonds. This is a pretty easy call. Dicky from Hong Kong from the small blind peels off with Ace Jack of clubs, and the player on the big blind also calls with King Deuce offsuit. The flop comes Ace 4-5 with a couple of diamonds. Dicky hits his top pair, and I pick up the flush draw. I was really excited because whoever has an ace, he will eventually pay me off if I hit my diamond on the turn or the river. And under the gun with pocket queens makes the c-bet to 18, and I make the call. I don't like the c-bet from pocket queens at all because the hands that will call are the hands that have an ace, have a straight draw or a flush draw like me or the small blind. It's unlikely to get called by worse hands if you make a c-bet on this flop, especially if it's multi-way. So I would prefer checking with my pocket queens. Small blind calls, big blind calls, and all 3 players call. The turn is the 10 of spades. And I hit the 10 on the turn. But I was pretty sure that one of those 3 players at least had an ace. So my pair of 10s is unlikely to be good in this situation. Under the gun with pocket queens looks a little uncomfortable and checks to me. I was in position, and like I said earlier, betting with my flush draw in this situation does not seem to be very good, so I decide to check back. And the river is the queen of clubs, and the pocket queens luckily get there on the river. This is gonna be a cooler for Ace Jack. Let's see how they play the river. Dicky from the small blind makes a bet of 80. He's trying to get value from worse hands like Ace 9, Ace 8, etc. and other pairs. I think the pocket queens from under the gun is perfectly disguised. Small blind will never put under the gun on pocket queens or any other strong hands that beat Ace Jack from the way they played the previous streets. But under the gun makes the raise to 280,000. What would you do if you were Ace Jack in this spot? Although under the gun might be pulling off some bluffs. However, on this spot on the river, when people raise on the river, it's heavily underbluffed. So if Ace Jack doesn't beat any of your opponent's value, you can also consider folding this hand, because it's such a huge river raise. However, the small blind thinks for a while and makes the call, and sees the bad news. If the river was the queen of diamonds, it will be really funny. We would have seen a lot of action. So here comes the next hand. Dicky from the hijack raises to 15,000 with Ace 9 offsuit. The donkey on the left makes the call. And small blind also calls with 7-5 offsuit. And I'm in the big blind with King Queen offsuit. I think this is a perfect spot to squeeze. So I make the raise to 90. Dicky from the hijack is a regular player, so when he gets out of the way, I can play with a cutoff heads up, and when I hit a king or a queen, we're most likely to be good, and I can extract a lot of value from him. Dicky gets out of the way, and cutoff with Ace 8 off makes the call. Small blind gets out of the way with 7-5 offsuit. I think the small blind called with 7-5 off because he wanted to get into the pot with a cutoff. He wants to see as many pots as possible with him. But no chance if I make 3-bet. It's my time. So we go heads up to the flop. The flop is wonderful for me. I had top pair, and like I told you earlier, he will make a stab every time when I check to him. And I check again this time. And of course, he makes the step. He steps to 100,000, which is about half pot. My remaining stack was about 700, and I make a small check raise with my top pair. And I don't think he will fold any pair or any draw. I make a small check raise to 230. He thinks for a while and makes the call. I didn't know that he had ace-8 offsuit with one club. This is just ridiculous. I put him on a lot of better hands like a pair of jacks, a pair of queens, a 7, or some club draws or straight draws. At least a hand that has some connectivity to the board, and not just a random hand like ace-8 off. The turn is the innocuous deuce of spades. This is a perfect turn card for me to make a second barrel. The pot is 670, and I keep betting to charge his draws or his worst queen or an occasional jack or 7. I think most likely we have the best hand here, since he's playing such a loose range, because I was thinking how to get all my chips into the pot to get max value, and I counted how many chips I had left. So whenever you're deciding a non-all-in turn bet, make sure you calculate the size of the pot and your remaining stacks. And I made a 250,000 bet on the turn, and he snap folds. Of course, he's not gonna call with ace-8 off. If he had a pair like a queen or a jack, I think he will definitely call. And here we go for a short break. And here in the next hand, the player from under the gun limps in with 10-8 of spades. The donkey from the low jack raises to 13,000 with ace-deuce offsuit. Girard from France 3 bets with king jack of spades from the hijack to 45,000. And I pick up pocket queens and the button. This is a monster hand. Finally time to get some big value. I tank for a while and make a small 4 bet to 110,000. The limper from under the gun gets away, the donkey with ace-deuce offsuit gets away, and only the 3-better calls with king jack of spades. This is not a very inviting call for him, because a lot of hands in my 4-bet range will absolutely crush his hand. I actually don't mind folding that king jack suited, and the flop's wonderful. I hit top set, and he hits an open-ender, which is perfect for me to extract a lot of value. Although he has 33% equity, any ace or a 9 will crack my set. So before he gets there, I need to make sure that I extract enough value. I make a flop continuation bet of 140, which is a little bit more than half pot. For king jack, it's an easy call. You can even consider raising, but because I cold 4-bet pre-flop, my range is going to be super strong, so calling is also fine. And the turn is the 8 of clubs, which by this time is almost a brick, because there aren't gonna be a lot of jack 9s in hijack's range. I put him on a lot of ace king, ace jack, king jack, and king queen, and hands like that. The pot was 525 and we had an SPR of about 1.6. I thought for a while and made the second barrel. And I made a big turn bet of 400 and he made the snap fold. I thought maybe I could have gone a little bit smaller on the turn because almost every hand in his range will fold to a 400,000 bet. So this hand is going to be huge. Chris from under the gun raises with ace-3 of hearts to 20,000. Dicky flats with ace-8 of diamonds from the low jack. The donkey calls with 6-3 of clubs. Girard from cutoff flats with pocket 7s. Our Taiwanese friend flat calls with 10-8 offsuit. And I, on the small blind, pick up pocket kings. This is also a perfect spot to squeeze 3-bet. And I make the 3-bet squeeze to 150. Chris from under the gun stands up and takes a look at my stack and asks how much I'm playing. After thinking a while, he decides not to call because the pot is going to be very bloated after he calls. All the suited aces fold, 6-3 suited also gets out of the way, and the only player who makes the call is Girard from the cutoff with pocket 7s. So a lot of suited aces that have a bad kicker will get out of the way, and a lot of pairs will call the 3-bet because people tend to think that if they hit a set, they will get paid. Of course, Cutoff was one of the late position players who got priced in and was almost guaranteed to play in position. So I put him on a lot of pairs like pocket 6s, pocket 7s, pocket 8s, etc. I don't think he will call with any ace-x hands like ace-10 off, ace-jack off, or king-x hands like king queen, king jack. Suited connectors are also likely to fold to this 7.5x 3-bet. And the button, after thinking for a while, also gets out of the way. So I think I made the perfect 3-bet size where I can get heads up on a 3-bet pot with only one player. The flop comes Jack 6-6, pretty safe for my hand. I was playing out of position, and I think my hand is a good candidate for a small flop c-bet. On a pot of 388, I decided to make a small continuation bet of 130, which is about a third pot. Cut off things for a while, and I think pocket sevens can call the flop. Although he might not be happy if he will be facing a barrel on the turn or the river. The turn comes the 8 of spades. And like I said earlier, his range doesn't consist of a lot of Broadway hands like ace-jack or king-jack, queen-jack, since a lot of those dominated hands will fold pre-flop to a 7.5x big 3-bet squeeze. Whereas a lot of pairs like pocket 6s, pocket 9s, pocket 10s will call despite a big 3-bet. And if I make a second barrel on this kind of board, a lot of pairs will start folding because my range is just so incredibly strong. And see what I do on the turn. I decide to snap check, and a lot of people on this table tend to think that I'm holding ace-king if I make a small c-bet and check the turn. And what are they gonna do? They're gonna stab. And let's see if pocket 7s will also make the stab. He frowns and thinks, so he bet the flop and checked the turn. So now I'm gonna put you on ace-king. Now let's make a small bet to deny your equity. He throws a time bank and makes a small turn stab of 125, which is very small, which is almost a fifth of the pot. So he is pretty much telegraphing his hand strength by his bet size. So he's pretty much telling us that he has pocket 7s, pocket 9s, or pocket 10s. And he just wants to check if I have an overpair or ace-king, which is really funny. So I think in this case, he has been telegraphing his hand strength that he's weak. And by raising our hand, we will make him fold almost all of his pocket pairs. So I think in this situation, calling is the right move. And by calling, if he has a bluffing hand, he will also continue bluffing on the river, because our flop bet and turn check looks a lot like ace high. I throw a time bank, think for a while, stay calm, and make the call. The pot's almost 900,000. And the river is a queen, which is quite an action killer to my opinion, because a lot of pocket pairs and ace-x will almost give up, because the queen heavily favors my range, because the cutoff almost doesn't have any queen x at this point. I check, and cutoff checks back. And pocket kings is good. I don't think that pocket 7s will call on any turn or river bet, so betting the flop and checking the turn and river was a good decision. So on the second session, I managed to win a lot of chips. I was up to 1.8 million, the chip leader of the table. And that's pretty much it for this session. I picked up a couple of monster hands and got a lot of value. I hope you enjoyed my hand reviews, and if you want to see more contents like this, please hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.